Good afternoon. Would you raise your right hand? You do solemnly swear the evidence in the testimony given the cause will be the truth, so help you God. Right. Have a seat over here. Adjust that microphone if you need to. Mr. Turner, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Doctor, would you tell the jury your name, please?
Garrett Phillips.
And am I correct, you've been here since first thing this morning?
Correct.
Appreciate you being here. Could you tell us what you do for a living?
I'm the Deputy Chief Medical Examiner at the Bexar County Medical Examiner's Office.
And what is the Bexar County Medical Examiner's Office?
The Bexar County Medical Examiner's Office is a county office statutorily established by the laws of the state of Texas to investigate sudden, unexpected, and unnatural deaths within Bexar County.
And what is the Deputy Chief Medical Examiner?
Fundamentally, the Deputy Chief Medical Examiner is one of the staff medical examiners, which is to say a forensic pathologist who is involved in the examination of persons who have suffered sudden, unexpected, or unnatural deaths. The Deputy Chief part, however, comes with additional administrative duties that see me as second to the Chief Medical Examiner.
And further on definitions, you said both forensic and pathologist, is that correct?
Correct.
Could you start with pathology and what that is?
Pathology is a specialty of medicine. It is divided into two subspecialties, anatomic and clinical pathology. Anatomic pathology is the study of tissues removed from a human body. Those may be as small as individual cells in the case of cytopathology, all the way up to the entire deceased body, as in autopsy pathology. Clinical pathology is the study of fluids removed from the body and tested in a laboratory setting. That is ultimately the specialty of pathology.
And how does forensic pathology differ from pathology?
Forensic pathology is a subspecialty within that area of anatomic pathology that I mentioned. Forensic pathology does prominently involve autopsy pathology, and as I said, that is a subspecialty primarily involved with the investigation of sudden, unexpected, or unnatural death.
Could you tell us about your training that has qualified you as a forensic pathologist?
After completing my undergraduate studies at Baylor University, I completed my medical doctorate degree at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas. That was 4 years. Following that, 4 years of anatomic and clinical pathology residency, also at Baylor College of Medicine, and following that, a year of forensic pathology fellowship training at the Bexar County Medical Examiner's Office.
And when did you conclude all of that training?
2015.
2015?
Correct.
And so since 2015, what have you been doing?
From 2015 to 2021, I was an assistant medical examiner at the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences in Houston, Texas. And then I returned to be a deputy medical examiner at the Bexar County Medical Examiner's Office at the end of 2021. It was in the end of 2022 that I became the deputy chief at Bexar County.
And you said that as a forensic pathologist, autopsy is one of your primary tools?
That is one of the primary tools that we will use in investigating death.
And is that used in investigating cause of death?
Yes.
And how many autopsies have you conducted?
Between 2,000 and 2,500 as a staff, and that's going to include cases in which I supervised one of those forensic pathology fellows in training.
So both hands-on as well as supervising other pathologists?
The pathologists in training, correct.
Very good. And when an autopsy, an official report is presented, is that reviewed by other pathologists?
Yes.
And tell us about that review process.
In our office, each autopsy report is co-signed by the chief medical examiner. The exception, of course, is if the chief medical examiner performed the autopsy, in which case I will review that autopsy and co-sign it.
And so in reviewing somebody's autopsy, how do you do that?
When reviewing the autopsy from another individual, the key is going to be going through the autopsy report, going through all of the ancillary documentation such as the investigative report, and as well going through any photographs. Again, this is going to vary depending on the complexity of the case, but ultimately the review is geared towards whether or not you agree with the original pathologist's conclusion of cause and manner of death.
So when you said that a second person signs off, it's not just a matter of signing their name?
It is confirming that they agree fundamentally with that cause and manner of death.
And does that require reviewing both their findings as well as the photographs and to see if you agree with what they have decided?
Certainly at least the findings, yes.
At least the findings. And so that is a common practice of forensic pathology to review other pathologists' work?
That is our procedure at the office.
And can you tell us on May 24, 2022, did your office get involved in a number of autopsies?
We became involved.
And tell us about that. How did you become involved?
As I mentioned, our office is statutorily established to investigate deaths within Bexar County. On occasion, we may be requested and, depending on the circumstances, be able to assist with the examination of decedents who have died in other jurisdictions. In this case, our assistance was requested, and so we were able to fulfill that request.
And how many, approximately, were all of the autopsies in this case conducted by one pathologist?
No.
Was it a number of pathologists?
It was.
But is it my understanding you volunteered to step up and review all of those autopsies so that you could testify to this grand jury? This jury.
I did review these.
Okay. And after reviewing those autopsies, were you able to reach an independent opinion as to cause of death of each of the children involved?
Cause of death, yes.
And are you here to testify about those things?
Yes.
Okay. It's
Your Honor,
not
for the record, we won't have any objection to Dr. Phillips testifying on behalf of the work everybody else did, and of course the independent work he's done in that. So.
Thank you.
And if we could start with our state's exhibit 739, and I believe we're going to try to go. Is it my understanding that y'all labeled these children not only by number but also alphabetically so that you could keep up with them?
There was, based on my understanding, an initial alphabetical assignment. However, those were fairly rapidly, I would say, converted into more formal medical examiner case numbers that we will generate routinely within our office.
Okay. And did you take photographs then to identify these children both by number and alphabetically?
Yes, I believe that was done.
And so I would like to start with State's Exhibit 739.
Your Honor, if we could just, I mean, at this time, what they're about to show this jury is going to be incredibly distressing, and we're just kind of starting into it. We just have a warning for them that they know what we're about to see.
And I don't mind explaining that, Your Honor.
Okay, go ahead.
As to these photographs that we're about to see, I just want to ease everybody's mind. These are not photographs of wounds, is that correct? There's been some things that have happened. Okay. Let me explain then. We are going to be limited. We are limiting our questioning to you, to the description of wounds in your opinion as to cause of death, which wounds caused death, which wounds did not cause death. But as far as photographs, we're not going to be showing photographs of those wounds.
I understand.
Fair enough? Which is not to say you didn't review those photographs, is that correct?
Correct.
But nonetheless, we are going to show photographs of the child so that we may identify those children as per what the indictment requires. Is that fair enough?
Understood.
So we will have a photograph of both the child alive as well as a clothed photograph of just the face of the child. Fair enough?
Understood.
And you're familiar with those photographs?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so now if we could start with Exhibit 739, Uzziah Garcia. And we have him by both number, is that correct?
Correct.
And that's the number that your department assigned?
That's correct.
And initially there was an A by that name, and that was also a way the children were identified?
Initially.
Okay. And could you describe for us, let's start with the wound, were there, did Mr. Garcia receive wounds?
Yes.
And were any of those wounds, did they cause death?
Yes.
And what type of wounds caused Mr. Garcia's death?
The most significant wound in this case was a gunshot wound that entered the back. That wound ultimately, most significantly, went through both lungs as well as the thoracic vertebral column, injuring the spinal cord. After having traversed both lungs, it did enter the abdomen and injure the spleen as well.
Okay. You talked about several organs here, and I just want to do it with the first child so we can get used to that, okay? Could you kind of go through the organs that you talked about it penetrated, what the function of those organs are, and why penetrating those organs would be a cause of death?
So in this case, going through both lungs is going to cause significant bleeding, and it's going to impair the ability to breathe. Going through the vertebral column and transecting the spinal cord is going to cause a loss of sensation and motor function below that level at the thoracic level. To clarify, there are several levels of the spine. The cervical spine is the neck, the thoracic spine is in the chest, and then the lumbar and sacral spine are in the abdomen and pelvis. So this was in the region of the chest. The splenic injury, the spleen is a vascular organ, and so that would be expected to also contribute to the bleeding in addition to the lung injuries.
And could you show us just generally on your body the general direction or pathway of that
Yes.
gunshot wound?
So this wound entered in the back relatively high here, and it's going to go across and end up in the abdomen somewhere around here.
And in your opinion, that a gunshot wound caused his death?
Yes.
And were there other wounds that he suffered?
There was an additional wound.
Could you describe that for us?
That was a entrance wound of the chest. However, only a projectile fragment was recovered, and that wound path was very superficial.
So it would not have led to death?
That wound was much less significant, and yes, I could envision that wound not leading to death.
Any other findings of significance to share with this jury?
There were some other apparent ballistic injuries or fragmentary impacts on other parts of the body.
And could you explain those for us?
Anytime a projectile fragments, which at least one of these fragments did, or anytime there are other projectiles that have been fired in the vicinity that have fragmented, those can bounce or ricochet off of nearby structures, or they can perforate nearby structures and cause blunt impacts to the body that would cause these sorts of ballistic fragmentary injuries.
And so whether the bullet passed through another object or ricocheted off of it, you can't say?
Not given these findings, I couldn't be more specific.
And also, as far as distance determination, are you able to determine how far a weapon was from a body when the body received that gunshot wound?
In some cases, yes.
And in this case, was it very limited, the time that you found somebody with a very close gunshot wound?
In this specific case, I could not definitively say that there was evidence of close-range firing. However, the reason that those other ballistic or fragmentary impacts can be important is because those can, on some level, mimic close-range firing, and so that will complicate the evaluation. So in this case, I do at least have those fragmentary injuries, but I don't have anything that I could definitively say was close-range.
And could you tell us how you determine distance and what the different levels of distance are when pathologists are looking at gunshot wounds?
Your Honor, I'm sorry, if I could make a recommendation just to reduce the secondary trauma that can be suffered. If we could just, we don't have to have the picture up while we're talking about distance and things like that. If we can have the picture, take it down, and then picture for the next one, I think it would be appreciated.
Well, it's their case. However you want to proceed, Mr. Turner, go ahead.
Our problem is the PowerPoint just moves to the next child.
You can
I
click
guess
the
we
button. You can click the button and it goes on.
You can click it off. That's fine. That's fine.
Both proceed.
And we were talking about distance determinations. Can you tell how far a weapon was from the body when the body received the wound?
Correct. So in some cases that is possible. When a gun is fired, the bullet obviously is going to exit the muzzle of the gun. However, more than just the bullet will also exit the weapon. There can be particles of burning and unburnt gunpowder, as well as residues of combustion. If the gun is fired in close enough proximity to the skin, those additional items can sometimes impact or deposit upon the skin. And so those findings that we would most typically look for would be soot, which is an amorphous grayish black residue that is the products of combustion, that's the smoke coming out of the gun, or powder tattooing, which are very, well, I should say, relatively regular punctate abrasions that are caused by the burning and unburnt particles of gunpowder striking the skin and abrading it and embedding into the skin. Beyond that range, it is possible for gunpowder to deposit on the skin, although because it lacks mass, it can no longer abrade the skin. In addition, under those ranges, if the muzzle of the gun is actually directly in contact with the skin, we can see contusions, abrasions, or lacerations associated with the muzzle of the gun on the skin.
And is there a name for if the muzzle is on the skin?
That would be a contact wound.
And what are the other classifications?
The other classifications would be near contact, depending on how much you want to lump or split. Something that's relatively near contact would probably be expected to have soot. That is, and this is a very fuzzy number, somewhere in the vicinity of the first 12 inches away from the muzzle. Now again, many variables are going to affect the actual distance, so the only real way to get a harder number than what I'm providing is to test fire the actual weapon against a witness panel with the actual ammunition used. But again, as a rough guide, about a foot. For powder tattooing, somewhere in the range of 3 to 4 to 5 feet is where powder tattooing will cease. For gunpowder particulate deposition, a very broad range, anywhere from 9 to 21 feet, gunpowder particles can begin to cease being deposited on the skin. As we move beyond that, we will have no evidence of close range firing. Some people would call that distant, although it's also reasonable to call that indeterminate because, again, depending on many of these variables, there may be different reasons why you're not seeing evidence of close range firing.
Thank you very much. And so we have talked about the wound that caused death. We've also talked about the chest wound, and you were talking about this third kind of abrasive wound. Is that correct?
So in this case, there were the fragmentary injuries.
Fragment wounds. I'd next turn to State's Exhibit 740. If you could display that. Mr. Rogelio Torres. And is that your autopsy number 1380?
Correct.
And is there a wound depicted in State's Exhibit 740?
A wound is seen.
And what's the nature of that one?
That is a wound that is adjacent to the right eyebrow.
Well, that was not a life-threatening wound?
In this case, that was described as a graze wound.
A graze?
Graze, correct.
Thank you. You can turn it up. Could you tell us then what your findings were as to Mr. Torres?
In this case, 12 gunshot wounds were noted. The injuries that were produced included the brain, the right lung, liver, right kidney, thoracic spine and spinal cord, as well as the right humerus, which is to say the long bone of the upper arm.
Okay. And each one of those wounds, those 12 wounds, were capable of causing death?
They're all potentially going to contribute. Of course, a wound that is traversing the brain is going to very likely be causative of death in the absence of the rest. However, if you take out, for instance, the wound traversing the brain, a combination of liver, kidney, thoracic spine, long bone fracture, and lung injury might well also be productive of death. But again, these were all collectively present, and so they were all considered as collectively causing death.
And any other non-life-threatening wounds?
Again, some of the other findings, such as the graze wound, would have been present. So there was the graze wound on the right eyebrow. There were some additional, less physiologically significant wounds that didn't cause major neurovascular organ injuries that were present.
Thank you. Exhibit 741, Miranda Mathis.
Yes.
Could you tell us what your findings are in regard to Miranda Mathis?
In this case, there were 12 gunshot wounds. The significant injuries included the heart, both lungs, the liver. There were injuries to the cervical spine and spinal cord, that is, again, in the neck, skull base fractures, and there were injuries to the larynx and trachea, that is to say, the windpipe, basically, as well as the pelvis.
And any non-life-threatening wounds?
There were some additional injuries that, again, the ones that I described are the ones that are sort of the most physiologically significant. There were some additional.
Let's just stay with those unless you find a wound that you consider significant as to whether or not it was a contact or close contact, something that would make it different from the other wounds you're describing.
So in this case, there were 3 of the gunshot wounds that in this case did demonstrate the gunpowder tattooing that were mentioned. And there was some additional gunpowder tattooing on the right hand.
And does that suggest range?
So this would be indicative of close range firing.
And that would be?
That would be the powder tattooing, so as we described it, the intermediate range.
And the distance would be about what?
As I said, somewhere in the vicinity of that 3 to 4 to 5 feet is when that begins to cease, so I would expect under that. But in order to get a better number, it would be necessary to test fire the weapon with the ammunition used.
So somewhere around 3, 4, 5 feet away.
That's where it ceases.
And
So if it's present, it's somewhere within that.
Closer than that.
Correct.
Thank you. State's Exhibit 742. Alethea Ramirez.
Correct. In this case, there were 4 gunshot wounds. There were injuries to the brain, both lungs, the aorta, left femoral vein, the pelvis, and left femur. The femur is the long bone in the thigh, and an injury to the trachea.
And those were the significant findings.
Those were the significant injuries, yes.
And each of them were gunshot wounds.
Gunshot wounds, correct.
Thank you. Exhibit 743. Bea Bravo.
Correct. In this case, the decedent had 8 gunshot wounds. The significant injuries included the brain, the major neurovascular structures of the right forearm, and the left upper arm, and fractures of the right radius and ulna. Those are the long bones within the forearm.
And any of those sufficient in themselves to cause death?
Certainly the brain injury, yes.
State's Exhibit 744, Ileana Torres.
Correct. In this case, there were 13 gunshot wounds. There were injuries to the heart, the left lung, the left upper arm vasculature, the liver, the facial bones, cervical spine, and the left humerus.
And was it a combination of the wounds or just a single wound that caused the death?
In this case, the heart wound itself would probably have been sufficient, but the rest were significant as well.
Thank you. State's Exhibit 745, Layla Salazar.
Correct.
I've already taken
Sorry.
it down. That's
Could
okay.
I see that real quick?
Yeah.
Just to confirm the number. Yes, thank you. In this case, there were 4 gunshot wounds. There were injuries to the left internal jugular vein, that is the major vein that brings blood from the head back to the heart. In addition to that, there were injuries to the left lung, the cervical and thoracic spine and cord, the tibia, which is the long bone in the shin, and there were skull fractures with intracranial bleeding, that is to say bleeding surrounding the brain, even though in this case the projectile did not traverse the cranial cavity. It went close enough to cause bleeding inside the head.
It passed enough energy in to cause bleeding inside the brain.
Correct.
746, Annabelle Rodriguez.
Correct. In this case, there were 5 gunshot wounds. The right carotid artery and jugular vein were injured. Again, the carotid artery takes blood to the brain. The jugular vein returns it from the brain. Both lungs were injured, and the thoracic spine and cord, as well as the larynx, were injured. Likewise, with the injuries to the cord, what you will sometimes see is that blood will then enter the cranial cavity. So there was some subarachnoid hemorrhage, which is a type of bleeding inside the head surrounding the brain.
Thank you. J.C. Luavanos, 747.
Correct. In this case, there were 3 gunshot wounds. The brain, the cervical spine, and the spinal cord were injured.
Thank you. And each of these were gunshot wounds?
These are all from gunshot wounds.
All the wounds that you've described for us are gunshot wounds, is that correct?
That's correct.
No other weapon caused any injury to this child?
None that was, no, it did not appear so. In fact, in each case, although we haven't specified it, projectile fragments were recovered associated with each autopsy.
Okay, associated with gunshot wounds.
Part of the bullet, basically.
So that confirms for you that these are all gunshot wounds?
One of the things, yes.
Exhibit 748, Ileana Garcia.
Correct. In this case, there were 5 gunshot wounds. The skull was fractured, again with that same type of bleeding inside the head, subarachnoid hemorrhage. There were also injuries to the right axillary artery and vein. The axillary artery and vein are the major blood vessels that run from the chest into the arm.
Tess Mata, State's Exhibit 749.
Correct. In this case, there were 5 gunshot wounds. The internal injury was the brain.
Okay, could you explain that a little bit more?
Yes, there was an entry wound of the face that did traverse the cranial cavity. There were additional injuries of the back, buttocks, and left upper extremity. However, these did not cause significant internal organ injuries.
Thank you. Matthew Rodriguez, 750.
Correct. In this case, there were 3 gunshot wounds. The brain and the right lung were the major internal injuries.
Jayla Seguero, number 751.
Correct. In this case, there were 2 gunshot wounds. Both lungs were injured. The aorta was injured. The aorta is the major blood vessel that comes off of the heart and carries blood to the remainder of the body. And the thoracic spine was also injured.
Thank you. State's Exhibit 752, Amory Joe Garza.
Correct. In this case, there was 1 gunshot wound, which injured the heart, right lung, liver. Those were the major internal injuries.
It was just one wound, but it went.
Yes.
Could you just show us how that traversed?
Yes, that's correct. This wound entered the back about here, and it went from back to front. And as it went from back to front, it went through the lung, the heart, the liver, and then was recovered from within the body.
Thank you. 753, McKenna Elrod.
Correct. In this case, there were 4 gunshot wounds. The injuries included both lungs, the brachiocephalic artery. That is one of the major branches of the aorta in the chest that ultimately is going to split off into the right subclavian and the right carotid arteries and carry blood to the head and the right arm. In addition, the left femur, both tibias, and the trachea were injured.
Exhibit 754, Alexandria Rubio. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Go too quick.
Correct. In this case, there were 2 gunshot wounds. The major internal injury was the brain. The additional wound was a superficial gunshot wound to the back.
And State's Exhibit 755, Xavier Lopez.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Too quick.
Correct. In this case, there were 3 gunshot wounds. Both lungs were injured, as well as the thoracic spine and spinal cord. In addition, there was a wound that perforated the scalp. It did not go into the cranial cavity. However, it did cause bleeding inside the head, subdural and subarachnoid hemorrhage. Well, I should say, let me back up. It could have contributed to that bleeding. In addition, the injuries to the spinal cord lower down could have contributed to that bleeding.
Thank you. And is that the final report on the children that y'all did pathology on?
No, I have a couple more.
Of children or?
Yes.
Okay, could you share with us your next one?
My next one is case number 22-1399.
And can you tell us about that, and I'll come back with the name. My apologies.
Yes, in that case, there was a single gunshot wound that injured the heart, both lungs, and the aorta. This case also demonstrated soot.
And what does the soot mean?
So the soot is the close range firing that is, again, within that 1 foot distance.
Thank you. And your final autopsy?
The case number is 2022-1400.
Okay. And we'll provide those with a future witness.
Yes. In this case, we had a single gunshot wound. That was a wound of the head injuring the brain and skull.
And thank you for doing all the work that it took to make these findings. Let me ask you, if I'm pushing too far, I don't mind going to somebody more familiar. But as a pathologist and reviewing the photos in this case, are you comfortable testifying that these were all children under 15 years of age?
Judge will stipulate to it.
I believe we have a stipulation that these were all children under 15 years of age.
Yes, Your Honor, we will.
Pass the witness.
Okay, then court will take judicial notice of the stipulation.
Pass the witness.
Your Honor, I guess before I start, I just ask out of respect for the children and their families that this exhibit be sealed by the court, that it cannot be accessed by the public, that it stays with the court, because I believe that would be necessary to present.
I had already instructed the court reporter as to that, so.
Yes, Your Honor. I didn't know you had, but I appreciate you doing so. Dr. Phillips, you and I, we know each other, actually.
Yes, sir.
I'll tell you this, I hate to see you here, but I do appreciate what you did to document what that monster did to those children, and I'll pass the witness.
That's all, Your Honor.
Is he excused, not subject to recall?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Goss?
No, Your Honor, we don't need him for recall.
All right. Thank you, Doctor. Let me see. We're gonna take a short break, ladies and gentlemen, 10 minutes to take care of another matter. So remember my instructions. We'll see you back in 10. Would everyone rise for the jury? You let me know when you're